second session. IGS trustee and president of the New York Society for General Semantics, Peggy Cassidy, will be in charge, coming to us from New York's Adelphi University.
Thank you, Lance. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our second session, Map and Territory. Our first presenters are Olena Marina of the Kerry Education and Training Board in Ireland and Igor Korolyov of Taras Shevchenko National University of Kyiv in Ukraine. The title of their presentation is Multimodal and Transmedial Construal of American Show Politics in the 21st Century Semantic Environment.
Okay, hello everyone. Hello, dear Lance. We are grateful to the Institute of General Semantics and Lance Trade for invitation, for their every support. Our cooperation with Lance started in 2021 when he kindly agreed to present the webinar Ecolinguistics, Media Ecology, and the Anthropomorphic Profile of War in social and psycholinguistic dimensions. It's a webinar held within ecolinguistic modes of Ukrainian discursive space in the European Multicultural Continuum project, funded by the National Research Foundation of Ukraine. Today we, my colleague Professor Olena, Marina, and I are honored to present our research, multimodal and transmedial construal of American show politics in the 20th century semantic environment. And I had the opportunity to present the results of our research in New York City live mode. So today my colleague Olena will present. Thank you. Olena, please.
Yeah, thank you, Igor. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. We are really honored to be here. One more time, it's always an honor and to present at such a symposium. And as Lance has mentioned in the beginning of our symposium, that today it's really challenging, and difficult time for our world. And that actually, I would say, brought us to the idea of talking about show politics, but show politics as one of the manifestations of social crisis that we are facing in the world today. Sorry, I will just share the screen. Okay. Okay, so we know that social crisis, generally speaking, is a manifestation of social contradictions. And due to social crisis, sustainable and traditional social practices are shattered. Of course, social crisis is an umbrella term. And as the United Nations put it in their World Social Report of 2024, we are facing the time of converging crisis, convergent multiple crises, which include a number of manifestations. They are growing geopolitical conflicts, pandemics, rising health pandemics, climate change, poverty, and a lot of others. That's why actually the United Nations call the whole world, it's a kind of a wake-up call to stand up and overcome the social crisis. So one of the manifestations of the social crisis is actually information crisis. And according to Naomi Alderman, so today we are facing the third information crisis, generally speaking. When we talk about information crisis and show politics, so in our research, we interpret show politics as one of the manifestations of social crisis. So as a result of information crisis and the content that is presented on various platforms of social media, we have come to the following conclusions: that it creates an opposition or polarizes societies. It leads to the deformation or distortion of scientific knowledge, as well as simplification of social objects, phenomena, and subjects, and of course causes incompatibility of natural and artificial in societies. So as you can see on the slide now, our research in general was concentrated on the recent elections and presidential elections in the United States. And mostly we concentrated on Donald Trump presidential campaign. So, and analyzing various platforms, we have evidently witnessed the representation of show politics, which is verbally and non-verbally seen. Just laying the kind of theoretical basis for our research. Of course, it's no doubt general semantics, and so I would say one of the main principles that the map is not the territory. And also proceeding from general semantics and the recent book of essays by Lance Strait. We based our research on the principle of meaning making. And meaning making, what is the most important is that we interpret the world, we evaluate surroundings based on the internal and external stimuli that we receive. So, and everything depends on of course, everything depends on our perception. Everything depends everything depends on it. And one of the important things that the recent book of Lance Strait, analyzes, it's the concept of negation, which is crucial for our research as well. And physically, in the world, in biophysical environment, there is no really negation or opposition. So this is all a result of our reasoning. It's a result of our thinking and how we label things, being positive, negative, contradictory, incompatible, etc. So this theory, we can draw parallels with cognitive linguistics, cognitive poetics, which also postulates our construal of the world. Here, like for drawing parallels as well and laying the theoretical background. So this concept of negation in and understanding of negation in general semantics is in parallel in the similar vein with the concept of biconceptuals by George Lakoff. And in his analysis, particularly also of Donald Trump presidential campaign. And as Krzyzewski also puts it, that you can see that man's achievements, they rest upon the use of symbols. And of course, we are symbolic species, and our masterly use of symbols can change the world, and people who can apply symbols masterly, they change the world, and change people's behavior, change people's minds, etc. So these principles of negation, of nonlinearity, of biconceptuality, also are in ensemble with the paradoxicality category that we also viewed in our research. And paradoxicality category is a construct. So of course it embraces it embraces various kinds of reasoning. So of course it is analogical, associative, but here we are based on paradoxical reasoning. So this paradoxicality category, it has the form of amoeba because its boundaries are blurred. So today, in general, every category's boundaries are blurred, and we are never sure which member can become actually the member of this or that category. So then the foci of paradoxicality category, they can be split into a number of foci, yes, contradiction, unusualness, anomality, mobility, etc. Each of them having their conceptual implications, like illogicality, you can see opposition, weirdness, unexpectedness, mysteriousness, etc. All of that forms the basis for defining actually political arena today being transformed into actually show politics as we name it. And of course, there are various facets. There is a preconceptual facet, which is based on the implicative features of archetypes and image schemas. Then conceptual facet, which is based on various conceptual schemas. In this case, for show politics today, it's more of a conceptual oxymoron. Also, of course, it is all in semantic features as representations of verbal facet, and definitely a non-verbal facet. So a lot of discussions have been going on today about it after a wonderful Chris's presentation of multimodality and multimodality workings. So we analyzed different platforms, as we have already mentioned. So, and one of the examples that we can provide from the presidential campaign are the debates, 2024 debates, presidential debates between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. So, so actually, everything that we could analyze, we could witness, was based really on paradoxicality, on some illogical things, on absurdity, etc. The candidates for the presidency, so they rather they didn't kind of, let's say, state the main principles, yes, more main principles of their campaigns, their presidential campaigns, but or programs, but rather they resorted to some insults. So their address to each other was quite non-official in usage of lexes and also other non-verbal, like paralingual, we can say. elements, etc. So, and one of the examples can be given when Donald Trump was talking about, it's a famous example. Yeah, he was talking about, it's about like migrants policy, that they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs, etc. There are videos that we could see like on the website of The Guardian, etc. And actually his claim, claim was based on one of the viral videos that was presented by one of the users of social networks. And then actually this part of the debates, it also went viral, and it got onto various platforms, particularly on YouTube. A kind of a remix, a kind of a song was created using these words. Generally speaking, we can say that like preconceptual or archetypal facet of show politics embodied in the material that we have analyzed, it is based on the archetype of trickster. And we know that trickster, it represents disruption, mischief, humor, wit, unpredictability, and it causes various unexpected events, illusions, tricks, etc. So talking about conceptual facet and a number of conceptual oxymora that we can draw. Of course, there are a lot more, but the main ones that we have come to a conclusion. So those are like allegation versus fact, short-term belief versus long-term good, etc. So, for example, talking about allegation versus fact, it goes about, for example, global warming policy presented by Trump, or also talking about peace talks concerning military conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza. And one of the things that President Trump mentioned was, I think we are relatively close, but we have to get other people to agree to it. So it was about peace talks in Ukraine. So, and of course, verbal facet, when we talk about verbal representation of these preconceptual and conceptual facets. In the analyzed material, we could single out the features of inconsistency, contradiction, incompatibility, impossibility, absurdity, and others. So, and we have already mentioned, so when it was the example of they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs, yes, so that later on, this piece of debates, and not only this one, yes, it spreads, the story spreads on different media, acquiring different transmedial forms. And one of that forms can also be, as an example, it can be given the Carnival that took place in 2025 in Düsseldorf. So where we could witness such representations of various contradictions between various contradictions in political views, etc., of Donald Trump, etc. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Our our second presenter is Mauro Ventola of the Center for Ontological Transformation in Italy. The title of this presentation is Saying Nothingness, General Semantics for Ontoanalysis.
Thank you. Thank you. The audio is okay? Okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for this introduction and greetings to everyone. Once again, I apologize for my English. This, my third contribution to the annual symposium, connects not only to the previous ones, but also to a lecture I gave last year to the University of Florence. On that occasion, I presented Ontoanalysis, the method for practicing ontophenomenology, the transformational discipline I have also presented here in the last 2 years. Ontoanalysis is a method that takes the existential psychoanalysis of Jean-Paul Sartre as its precursor and describes transformation as a movement that consists of the refusal of bad faith and the spirit of seriousness to inhabit the tilled ground of nothingness, lack of foundation, and finally to give oneself according to a commitment. The existential psychoanalysis reveals that each individual possesses an original world project. However, this project, despite being unique, refers back to a more universal, fundamental project. The latter concerns the attempt to realize a state of completeness and the consciousness of it, which Sartre calls the project of being God. The driving force behind that is revealed by Sartre as an escape from nothingness, from absence. We could say with Bataille that the nature of the fundamental project is that only salvation counts, that we are obsessed with salvation. So, on that occasion, 3 conclusions were drawn. 1. All forms of bad faith are a way of escaping from nothingness. 2. The genesis of our identity is a compensation for the rejection of nothingness. 3. There is no authentic possibility to be a clearing for a possibility until we are standing on nothing. Therefore, a method ontoanalysis, which is not therapeutic in nature, but whose aim is the promise of empowering people to be what they choose to be, sees the relationship with nothingness as the turning point. I start again from this point because, as my title says, general semantics can help us in this crucial passage, saying nothingness. I will proceed by general thesis. 1. Looking at Korzybski's endeavor, the unifying concern of his work is the human condition of infantilism and insanity. By introducing the idea that the meaning of words and symbols is the neurological response by the organism, he takes semantics out of the theoretical discussion of the meaning of words as defined by words. The term general that qualifies semantics studies the impact of evaluation and meaning on human experience. In this sense, general semantics has a transformational nature, and this is the connection to ontoanalysis, how a modification of evaluation is correlated with a modification of the form of life. 2. While, as Glicksberg noted, the aim of general semantics is fundamentally transformational, striving to educate the new generation to make the difficult transition from Aristotelian to non-Aristotelian system, our contribution aligns with the broader evolution of general semantic scholarship. This evolution has seen a significant expansion of its theoretical and operational scope, moving beyond the primary focus on extensional to a deeper engagement with the intentional realm. This is what Francesco Barone called the second phase of general semantics, which, starting from the 50s on, sees the beginning of that process of liberalization that leads to broadening and enriching the issues raised by Korzybski. 3. From this extension, we foreground the specific reception and development of general semantics by Italian scholars, Barone, Baldini, and Piro, who always emphasize the crucial role of the intentional dimension. This emphasis culminates in the seminal work of Piro, where he builds on consciousness of abstracting to articulate the notion of semantic awareness, grounded in the double validity of the extensional and the intentional. Pero was convinced that general semantics concealed a question concerning a possible operational transformation in the domain of applied human sciences. This real turning point relates to the identification of the operational method of the transformational, which is based on semantic awareness. The latter, the method of ontoanalysis, is the consciousness of abstracting exercised in all conditions of learning, research, expressions, and life. 4. If the consciousness of abstracting is expanded to include our internal landscape, a whole series of facts that have the status of existential facts come into play, the first and the last of which is the experience of nothingness. Only now can it emerge and reveal itself, because, as Heidegger says in What is Metaphysics, science, with its inherent focus on beings, can only grasp entity within the world, but in doing so misses the nothing. Science can grasp only beings, but not nothing. The latter reveals itself through the affective attunement of anxiety. Anxiety, in fact, is the index of our understanding of nothingness. It's the sense of absence of ground that's everywhere, ourself, others, and the world. 5. However, employing Lacan's terminology, nothingness is experienced to the extent that it is affected by the signifier. And yet, before even to this, the nothing emerges for us always in its genetic union with the linguistic presuppositions hidden beneath all symbolic systems, what Korzybski called the material of the linguistic unconscious. So here, in contrast to Lacan, for whom the unconscious is structured like a language, with general semantics, we can invert this thesis and advance that it is language that functions like an unconscious. The Sapir-Whorf-Korzybski hypothesis reveals that before to the meaning and signifiers of subjectivity, there are elementary structures of language which are projected onto the totality of the world. 6. Kenneth Johnson said that our language makes us talk like qualities are in the things. So even how we encounter nothingness is affected by how our language is structured. Korzybski identifies some of the elementary structures connected to those semantic incidents that most limit human experience: two-valued orientation, elementalism, absolutism, identification. All of this leads in the idea of semantogenesis, human diminution from the performative effects of language structures, which also Adam Smith considered to be of great significance. And it is so because, in light of what is emerging, we posit the thesis that the ultimate source of alienation has a semantogenic origin. It is not given by nothingness in itself, but by our word about nothingness, our semantic reaction to nothingness. 7. If transformation is the general shift from A to non-A paradigm, it must be declined in its crucial relationship with nothingness, grasping its ultimate essence. Now, as Hayakawa writes, Korzybski regarded two-valued orientation as an internalization of the laws of Aristotelian logic, and his system as an internalization of modern infinite value logic. From this perspective of ontoanalysis, this means that the structure of alienation is understandable as a relationship with nothingness through a two-valued orientation. Instead, the transformation involves the passage to a multi-value orientation. 8. For conversion to take place at this stage, it is necessary to express nothingness and our relation to it from the perspective of experience as lived. The research will need to formalize 3 points: the semantic explication of nothingness, the semantic explication of our present two-valued relationship, the semantic explication of our possible infinite value relationship. 9. Michael Novak says that nothingness derives from the recognition that there is no intact and meaningful word in itself. The structure of meaning is put by culture and by the self, and therefore it can also be taken away again. If this is a phenomenological description of nothingness, the semantic explication of nothingness can be expressed as everything is empty and meaningless, where everything indicates life itself, others and myself, and empty indicates the absence of a foundation and the lack of intrinsic meaning. From this starting point, our already present relationship is the consequence of the two-valued orientation to which language induces us, and modulating itself in dichotomies such as right, wrong, should, shouldn't, good, bad, like, dislike, etc. So the already present relationship with nothingness is everything is empty and meaningless, and there is something wrong in this. It shouldn't be that way. Even before we can individually distinguish what we have made this signify, we have, with respect to this universal existential fact, the already present essentialist type of relationship. 10. The application of semantic awareness to nothingness unveils an alternative equation. It is empty and meaningless that everything is empty and meaningless. That is, even this same existential fact has no any intrinsic meaning. This is the formal determination of the evaluation correlated to a non-Aristotelian, non-essentialist orientation, and therefore the opening to infinite values and possibilities of signification. Conclusion. The meeting of semantic analysis and ontoanalysis shows a turning point in how we relate to nothingness. While the refusal of empty and meaningless is servitude, being able to dwell in empty and meaningless is to what Bataille calls sovereignty. In ontophenomenological interpretation, adult humanity is that which is able to endure absence. To be a clearing for the future, even before taking a stand for a possibility, it is necessary to be in the impossible condition of nothingness. Instead, the sovereign operation is the technical conversation to get there, intentionally and recurrently, that is, in a disciplinary sense. However, to explicate the ontological existential dimension of alienation, philosophy cannot be understood in the sense of the early Korzybski as a pure verbalism, but rather, as Schelling put it, as an open secret. A secret that pertains, yes, to the notion of structure, but to the structure of man, of his being open to the world. Transformational research has the task of tending to the most extreme limit of this, to the full expression of what can be said about the unsayable, about the nothingness. While about nothingness as such, one cannot say anything, one must be silent, as Wittgenstein wrote, the task, the moment we move to semantic awareness, becomes to be able to say precisely what still unsaid. One cannot speak of nothingness in itself, Wittgenstein correctly said, and Korzybski with him, but of nothing for me, as Sergio Piro, the psychiatrist, wrote in the final proposition of his work, everything else must be said. Thank you.
Thank you, Mauro. Our third speaker is Daniela Theinová of Charles University in the Czech Republic. The title of her presentation is The Poem as a Medium, Ailbhe Darcy's Ekphrastic Encounters.
so much, Peggy. Can I be heard? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much, Lens, for inviting me and for encouraging me to become a member of MEA. It's also intimidating slightly to be presenting along with so many experts in the fields into which I've only just started dipping. But time is scarce, so let me plunge right in. In a note on a poem called Jellyfish, one of the many pieces in her 2018 collection, Insistence, featuring the not-so-charismatic fauna, vermin, invasion plant species, and other assorted characters, Ailbhe Darcy, one of the most original voices in contemporary Irish poetry, explains, I had in mind Carl Mathieson in The Guardian on the 21st of August 2015, and she goes on to quote from the Climate Correspondence article. Like a karmic device come to punish our planetary transgressions, jellyfish thrive on the environmental chaos humans create. Is the age of jellyfish upon us? In this paper, I will attend not so much to jellyfish, of course, as to poetry. And if other presenters have been talking about the new media, and we have had Claude Sonnet 3.7, poetry is indeed one of the oldest media. And I will attend to Darcy herself, whose writing is always inflected locally and by personal experience, but also alerts to globally significant issues, including political violence, migration, and climate change. Yet even if they are openly engaged, her poems are also intent on freeing themselves from public discourse and responsibility. And I will argue that Darcy is able not only to overcome this double bind in her work, but to turn it into a creative tension, and that she does so by constantly playing up the productive contradiction between immediacy and mediation, or hypermediation, to refer to Bolter and Rusin. Darcy's shockingly precise, delicate, and at the same time fierce lyrics issue from two basic sources. On the one hand, they are fed by angry pacifism and social protest. On the other, they stem from a detailed observation of the self and the world. While the former engaged mode is often triggered by information and images encountered in media, the latter one combines a focus on everyday detail with lively ekphrastic representations of visual art or anything on the radar. But regardless of whether Darcy's poetic meditations are inspired by the observation of natural, synthetic, or artistic objects, those encounters are invariably experienced or recollected via another medium, namely another text, photograph, film, the news, or the internet. By simultaneously pinpointing and denying the borderline between verbal and visual imaginations, Darcy plays up intermediality and remediation as a fundamental principle of ekphrasis. All in all, Darcy's ekphrastic and highly elusive poetic practice keeps drawing our attention to the moment of mediation. By thematizing its interactions with diverse other texts and channels of communication, her poetry illustrates the development in contemporary poetry, which Marjorie Perloff describes as the embrace of an original writing. Interestingly, Perloff proposes that the onset of the digital age and further expansion of communication media on the turn of the millennium contributed to the creation of an environment of hyper-information, a world of bloggers, websites, and more recently, YouTubers and influencers, in which, as Perloff has it, we are all authors. Darcy's poetry is very much the product of this climate. Although she self-consciously draws on the seemingly endless resources of a democratic cyberspace, however, she also keeps pointing to its pitfalls and strives to extricate her verse from its all too pervasive influence. My central claim is or my central claim in the following is that Darcy manages to balance elements of both approaches, that she is able to explore the affordances of other media, and here I apply the term in a broad McLuhanesque sense, while at the same time distancing her poetry from them by construing the poem itself as a medium. A mode of artistic expression, in Darcy's hands, poetry clearly becomes a kind of medium. In other words, a condition or an environment in which something may function or flourish, to refer to a dictionary definition of the term. And this notion of media, poetry included, as built environments in which all kinds of connections become apparent, points us to the concept of media ecology, the idea expressed by Neil Postman, for example, that the means by which people communicate comprise an environment just as real and influential as the terrain on which they live. In his early discussion of media as an environment, Marshall McLuhan summarized the core of his theory by defining media as an extension of the human senses, which, in my view, also perfectly captures what poetry does. In declaring that the medium itself is the message, McLuhan emphasized his belief that since they profoundly affect our sense of the world, media themselves should be treated as no less important than the content they carry. Lance Straight notes that McLuhan's dictum about the medium being the message is a wake-up call, alerting us to the fact that although content tends to monopolize our attention, media function as an invisible environment shaping the way we communicate. And I hope to illustrate that Darcy manages to ask about our place in the world and issue a well-audible wake-up call precisely by basing her poems on a wide concept of media with which her texts are inextricably and inevitably integrated. Although some of Darcy's most powerful poems hinge on the daily dosage of the news, her work insists on avoiding what the Northern Irish poet Michael Longley described as the temptation to hitch a ride on yesterday's headlines, to write the poem of the latest atrocity. As if in response to Susan Sontag's claim in regarding the pain of others, that no we should be taken for granted when we are looking at other people's pain, Darcy's poetry foregrounds and individualized conscience and consciousness by including references to personal fears, failures, and a sense of shame. More importantly, by applying imagination to an already existing verbal or pictorial documentation of a crisis, and by writing the visual image into the essentially foreign environment of the poem's language, Darcy's writing imparts on us the emphatic ability of poetry to see oneself in or as the other. At the same time, however, since she accentuates the imaginative possibilities that follow from the collaboration between the poem's linguistic material and the visual image and medium, Darcy releases poetry from the simplified rhetoric of reiteration, agitation, and identification. She's well aware that the reverse side of generalized consternation is the tendency to appropriate another's trauma. But not us, exclaims the speaker of a poem entitled Shoes from the poet's first collection. The lyric recounts the results of an online search for a pair of zany designer heels, which amounts to a virtual tour of political injustice and violence across history, starting with the barefoot women in rural Ireland and Africa, bringing up Marie Antoinette and Imelda Marcos, and ending with the 9-year-old girl who stepped with both of her feet onto a landmine last week. But not us, concludes the voice of the poem, to emphasize the impossibility of a genuine connection, as well as the impulse to look away. Shoes is dedicated to Muntazer al-Zaidi, the Iraqi journalist who threw his shoes at George W. Bush at a press conference in Baghdad in 2008, and you have the shoe monumentalized there in Baghdad in one of the pictures. The invasion of Iraq and the frustration following the mass protests in 2003, in which Darcy took part while living in Paris, informs many poems in this first collection. She later admitted in an interview that it was in the aftermath of those protests that her poetry grew up, because now it was bewildered and frantically trying to work something out. Among the things that her poems have been trying to figure out since is the contradictory mixture of pleasure and pain in art and in poetry's words. As they jostle in the space of her poem, the divergent emotions of anger and anxiety, guilt and dejection fed by media coverage contribute to a sense of defiant capitulation. I suggest that it is in these moments of internal conflict and apparent withdrawal that the capacity of Darcy's poetry to touch upon the actual and also the imaginary aspects of contemporary life originates. To conclude, I'd like to go back to the poem I indirectly started with, the one about jellyfish, or at least partially about jellyfish. The piece starts by the sea with the speaker picking her way on the beach covered with stranded jellyfish, addressing her young self, which later turns out to be her little son. It is as if an invasion from another world has taken place. At first, you only noticed one, a translucent, crisp nestling in the sand, the perfectly circular ghost of its gonads, and recalled another summer's plump and gloating. Then he took in depth's full murmuration on the strand, slack-pocked with the dried-up sucker marks. Child, your responsibility, a castle of sand, a wet dog, an enormous sky. You happen on them again in the future, in their hundreds. Your child moves with a shovel to sling them back into the sea. Once you saw a photograph of a child, lifeless, on the beach. So did everybody. The themes of hospitality and migration, environmental guilt, and the ethics of care are all invoked in this poem. But what we also have here, even though you can't really see it in the castrated version on the slide, is a suggestion of iconicity of a concrete poem, a visualization of a concept and natural phenomenon, that is the waves swelling and ebbing in the sand. And so it is on the beach that we find ourselves in the end, as the poem performs its final somersault and faces up with a blunt reminder, intermixed with elements of ironic aestheticization of a globally medialized tragic event from the 2015 European migrant crisis. It is not a sign of self-indulgence or because of having succumbed to media content that Darcy finishes with a reference to the photograph, which virtually everybody did see at the time, virtually. If Darcy admits elsewhere that it was metaphor that got us into this mess, this poem also illustrates how she, as a poet, can't help but turn everything into a metaphor. If she accepts any responsibility for herself as a poet, it is twofold. On the one hand, it is to defend the pliability and the telling opacity of poetic speech against the cliches and automatic connections of media coverage. On the other, it is to refrain from appropriating the lives and experiences of others, people, cockroaches, jellyfish, artworks, and ecosystems, while staying alert, of course, to the stories they tell and the stories told about them. What I hope to have shown in this paper is that in her acts of remediation, or we could say recycling of images and messages gathered through diverse other media, Google search, newspaper articles, sculpture, family photographs, Darcy makes the medium as such visible, which includes her text, and opens it up for scrutiny. In her handling, the poem itself and its individual objects become important witnesses, not only to the atrocities and the delights of the world, but to the irresolvable moral dilemmas of art as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. And our fourth and final presenter in this session, before I try this, John, how do you pronounce your last name? Where is John?
Cousins.
Cousins?
Cousins.
Cousins. Oh, Cousins. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Our presenter is John Cussans of the University of Worcester in the UK. The title of his presentation is "This is Not a Diagram: Applying General Semantics to Contemporary Arts Pedagogy."
Okay, yeah, let's just check. Is this looking good? Great. Okay, so thank you everybody and for all their presentations so far. This is an incredible honor, I have to say, to be speaking at the IGS Symposium. And I want to thank Dom Heffer, who's chairing the next panel, for having kind of introduced me to the IGS, having met at a conference recently, and he found out that I'd been working on general semantics for many years. Whoops, I need to go back. So my name is John Cussans. I'm an artist, writer, an arts educator. I'm a senior lecturer in fine art at the University of Worcester, where I lead the BA Fine Art with Psychology, and I also lead the Arts and Health Research group there. It's good to see at least one of my students in the audience too. So the title of this talk is it comes from a chapter in a book that I've recently published with my colleagues David Burrows, Dean Kenning, and Mary Yakub. Mary's also in the audience. Hi, Mary. That was published in February this year about diagrams, and it begins with the chapter on Korzybski. Begins with a definition of diagrams, and I talk about how we struggled with definitions throughout writing the book. And it was I talk about intentional extensional definitions, and in that beginning, and I arrive at a broad definition of diagrams following Korzybski. I won't be talking specifically about diagrams with their definitions today, but I will be talking about one specific diagram, which is the structural differential. Obviously, the title of this talk, and we've seen this image many times, is based on René Magritte's painting The Treachery of Images, which everyone is familiar with, often called This Is Not a Pipe. And basically, I've been using this image for many years to try and illustrate Korzybski's concept of the map is not the territory. I'll come back to that. That's where the title of the diagram comes from. I've been teaching art, both studio and theory, for probably 25 years now. And I'll talk a little bit more about how I came to arrive at general semantics. This is my dad. My dad's a sign writer, or was a sign writer, sign painter in the US. So I grew up helping my dad paint signs. And one of the important things about sign painting is that you realize that signs and words and letters are not just printed and written, they're also drawn and painted. And this idea that words and language have this aesthetic, tactile, haptic dimension was fundamental to my experience as a young child working with my dad. I also learned very quickly that words are also the way they're painted, the way the style they're painted in, the type form, the letters, the colors, the textures. These all have meaning that is above and beyond, or as well as anything that the signifiers or the signs may be referring to. So from this very early experience, I could see that signs have a depth and richness. They also have a tactile haptic quality that's really important. I went on to study graphic design and illustration at my BA. And on that program, I was introduced to semiotics. And I spent a lot of time thinking about semiotics. Just to say that semiotics, from really quite early on, once I started to understand it, also treats signifiers and signs in a rather abstract way. As you can see, the relationship between tree and the image of the tree in this famous diagram, which is based on Ferdinand Saussure's course in general linguistics, which informs structuralism and Barth's semiotics, is again quite simplistic. And there's not a lot in semiotics that looks at this much more haptic, sensual connotative dimension of the sign, the letter, the word image. So what I'm saying here is that words are also images as well as being abstract entities. This is kind of represented again by Magritte very straightforwardly in this great painting based on a book by Freud, The Interpretation of Dreams. Anyone who's read Freud will know that words and images have a fundamental role to play in the unconscious. I'm not going to go too far into that, but what's great about René Magritte and the other surrealists is that they already started to play with this relationship between the signifier and the signified, detaching those signifiers and signifieds in ways that made us think differently. So I'll be talking a little later about William Burroughs, who really led me to general semantics. And when he talks about cutting word lines and cutting image lines, I think the surrealists were already doing that kind of work early on. But also importantly for Magritte, these are all painted signs. They're actual paintings painted in with paint and brushes, even though they're paintings of words and signifiers and signified. Okay, so yeah, so surrealism has been a hugely important part of my learning and education, and I won't go too far into this, but on the left is an image of Salvador Dali, which was a vision he had while reading a newspaper in France, and was speaking about Freud and had an image of Freud's mind being shaped like a snail. And on the right is Freud's famous Signorelli parapraxis diagram. Again, I don't want to get into the details of this. I'm just saying that linguistics, semiotic structuralism, psychoanalysis, and surrealism are the kind of things that I've been interested in, have led me in the direction I'm going in, I've arrived in. Also doing a degree in graphic design and illustration, we started to realize that graphic design, illustration, marketing, advertising is a way of manipulating people. And you can shape people's beliefs and opinions and ideas. So Vance Packard's book, again, people don't talk so much about this now, but it's still clear that depth psychology has been used for a long time to convince people to do things they don't want to do, to buy things they might not want to buy, and to believe things that may not be true. So that's been an important part of my experience. And also, this image at the bottom, the idea of being glued to screens, I'll talk a little bit more about that too. But basically, it's something that I've been using the structural differential to try and rectify with my students. So as I said, here's the General Semantics intensive summer session from 1939, I believe. We've got Hayakawa on the left, Korzybski in the center. And on the bottom row, from the second from the right, you have a young William S. Burroughs, around 26 at that time, just graduated from Harvard. And so Burroughs attended the General Semantics seminar. And much later on, after developing his addictions and working with them for many years, he wrote the text which really introduced me to general semantics and Korzybski, which is Our Book is Here. Our Book is Here, if anybody hasn't read it, is about a story of an American businessman called Mr. Hart, who goes to Mexico to try and discover the Mayan books of the dead, to try and control life and death. And the important insight there from very early on is that he has only either or thinking. Burroughs is using Korzybski's the idea of extensional thinking to criticize this either or black and white thinking, trying to control life and death. Trying to not understand the integration of life and death. Importantly too, it contains a notion of control that is an early version of Burroughs' notion of control, which is in fact a computer which you can ask questions for $1. And it involves William Burroughs asking questions to a computer. And one of the big insights from that is that the computer asks him to wait. And Burroughs describes time as a landing strip. Now, again, I won't go too far into this, but it's about control, addiction, attention economy, and Burroughs was an expert in this area. It also, in the Our Book is Here also contains a book of breathing, which makes explicit references to general semantics and the importance of general semantics for freeing us from control. There's my copy of the General Semantics seminar, which I picked up in 1991, a well-thumbed copy, and I've been reading it, trying to make sense of it and working with it ever since. So yeah, these ideas of control, addiction, and conformity are really what general semantics, and particularly the structural differential, has been a tool for trying to help students work with and to kind of dislodge these things from our nervous systems, to use the language of Burroughs. So everybody's familiar with the structural differential, I'm sure, and you know, we've all seen that you're all familiar with this. The important thing for me was that Korzybski, when he came up with the structural differential shortly afterwards, said that it should be 3 dimensions. This is hugely important, and it's the essential thing I want to say today. It has to be 3 dimensions for it to work. This is what Korzybski said, and it got patented, but it didn't get used. I actually have my version of it here, which I'll be maybe making reference to in a little while. But the crucial thing here is that it has to be physically used, it has to be manipulated. And that's what makes this diagram so valuable for teaching arts education. Arts education, particularly fine art, we make physical objects which have to be seen in a physical space. They're 3-dimensional crafted objects which are valued for how they're made, for being able to experience them in the round. They're made in studios. And despite this, this fact that we make entirely physical objects and things to be experienced, touched and seen with all our senses, our teaching methods are still largely, and it's with most teaching methods, we use screens, we use 2-dimensional surfaces, and much of the information that we are kind of operating with as educators happens on this 2-dimensional level, with the 4-dimension of time in there. But what's missed out is the 3rd dimension. You can see I'm trying to do these gestures to indicate that. But of course, there's nothing I can do. We can't move through the screen space. And similarly, when we're giving talks, we are physical beings giving talks. But in a sense, there's no diagram which can really represent this question of the 3-dimensionally of the space of exchange, the lived, breathing, physical space of things. So the important line for me in the structural differential is this line between perceived things and the labels we attach to them. This is all, for all of you familiar with general semantics will know this, but the crucial thing is to say that what's important is the experience, the sensual, smelt, tasted, lived, physical experience of the world, which happens before we ever need any language for it. So in fine art teaching, there's often a very unhelpful distinction made between theory and practice. And it's as if theory is all the writing, reading, research.
Keep coming forward.
What's that? Sorry? Somebody's got their microphone on. Okay, that's funny. It sounded like somebody from upstairs shouting down. Okay, hopefully that wasn't for me. I didn't hear it if it was. So importantly, the structural differential as a 3-dimensional object shows that we need to have physical experience of things, that most of our experiences is non-verbal and non-linguistic, and that the words we use are simply conventions there to label the things that we think are important. So for that reason, I've Korzybski encouraged us to adapt the device, and I have created a image level of the device. You can see here, which shows that I won't go too far into this, but the importance here is that there's a 2-dimensional image, not a 3-dimensional object. It's the same thing that, in a way, Magritte's painting is suggesting, that of course the actual painting isn't there, but let's not forget the actual painting is a real physical object. There's numbers for several of them that actually should be seen in the flesh, and it will be different than as an image, and it's only a digital image. I also then do a digital zoom where I explain that, you know, you go into a digital image, it's pixelated. I'll take a painting down, one of the students' painting, we'll take a jeweler's loupe and we'll look at it, and we'll see that in fact, no matter how deep you go optically with a jeweler's loupe, you never arrive at a pixel level. And then finally, and I'm kind of coming to the sort of end of the talk, which has been rather rushed, but that's okay. That what I will do is I'll remove one of the balls from the device. And I will, and I can't do it if you're there, this proves the point, that I would throw it into the audience. Someone will grab it, and which demonstrates is what Korzybski called the Fido brain, that an animal, a human, can do all those things, can smell, touch, taste, catch the ball, react without ever using language. Most of our life is lived sensually in an embodied way. And yet most of what we do, and increasingly what we do, is we speak through digitized 2-dimensional screens, even in arts education. So what I really am arguing for now, I think the anthropometer structural differential is an incredibly powerful tool, and I don't know any other device that I've ever come across, which is a three-dimensional diagram that has to be used in real time in order for it to do its work. And that work is something that almost no other diagram or other mode of teaching that I've come across can possibly do. And it does an amazing job of helping students to understand that the map is not the territory, words are only labeled for things, and most of our experiences are lived in 3 dimensions with our full bodily senses, and that we should, as much as possible, stop staring at digital screens which operate only on the 2-dimensional plane and miss out the whole physical space of lived experience. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And now I'm going to stare at a 2-dimensional digital space and try to see who might have some questions. And as Eva said in the first session, I'll do my best. I'm going to have to scroll through pages of, little boxes of faces to see who's got their hands up. So we have about 10 minutes, and I am happy to take some questions. Bob.
Thank all of you for your excellent presentations. It's interesting that two of the presentations had Magritte's Ceci n'est pas une pipe in there, and I'm going to be using it when many of you are going to be asleep later on this afternoon at 3 o'clock. And it's interesting because in French, it's called La Trahison des Images, and in English, it could be translated, the word trahison can be treachery, as in what we just saw, treachery of images. But I've also seen that same painting translated as the treason of the pictures. So I think the other dimension besides time is this multilingual dimension. We see this image of a pipe, we can conceptualize a 3D pipe, as John just would ask us to hold the pipe in our hands figuratively. So I just wonder if any of you want to talk about what it's like to work in the dimension of multilingualism.
Can I respond quickly to that?
Please.
Sure.
So I didn't get a chance to do that, but in the past I've had much more international cohorts, and currently my cohorts are largely UK based, but it still can work. And what I'll do is when I throw the ball out and ask them, I get them to share that, and I get them to describe it in their own language. I don't know if this answers your question, but so maybe Korean, maybe Lithuanian. And then we look at and we compare the different words for the different attributes of the red. And then we start to show that these are different semantic environments. Sometimes there are roots in common. So we also open up that difference in language through the device too. So that's how I do it.
Did any of our other panelists want to respond to that? And or any of you have other questions, comments?
Yeah, I can comment a little bit. So actually, I've been working with multimodality for quite a while, probably like since maybe 2012. And I would say that it's amazing, absolutely, from the perspective of kind of theoretically. And it's amazing from practical perspective, because I've been working a lot and I've been researching a lot poetry. And so poetry today, it is something unbelievable. So I've been analyzing the poetry, digital poetry, like Google search poetry, found poetry, whatever, and a lot of, let's say, poetic products that are offered on YouTube. So you can't just go with language alone, absolutely, because the words only, they do not give this let's say, multifaceted picture of meaning making, meaning construction, etc. So it is about how every mode complements each other, or modes can get into contradiction. So, and of course, how then the perception of this or that piece goes. Everything is multimodal. It has always been multimodal. But again, our perception and our academic interpretation of these things has been evolving and developing within times. Yes, like multimodality theory, etc., etc. And then talking from, like, again, another practical perspective is teaching a language, because I teach English now. And so the same as John has just showed us, absolutely different semantic environments, different nationalities, different perception of different objects. So, and of course, remembering things and associating objects that we label with a certain word is different in different nationalities, in different cultures. And multimodal interaction helps with that. And I'm sorry, I don't remember, but somebody made a comment about earlier about oh my God, wow, I forgot. Okay, whatever. So multimodality is really great, and we understand that, of course, language has this primary place for us. We are human beings, we are humans, and our verbal communication, this is what we have primarily, yes. But all these visuals, etc., they complement our perception and understanding of the world and construction of the world as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Oza?
Hi, thanks for the presentations. Lovely conference today. I'm in Pittsburgh, by the way, US, just to give some concrete, positionality. So John, thank you for the presentation. I love what you created there. It's so exciting to see that. I'd like to make one. I'll consult you about that later. But so my question is, started with Mauro Ventola's presentation on consciousness of abstracting, which then connects to yours. And I wanted to ask him, but I can ask this to you and to others here. I was wondering if, when he talked about absence and nothingness, right, if he associated absence of meaning with nothingness. And then when I was listening to your presentation at the end, when you said, I can still throw the ball and someone in the audience will catch it, right? So that brings us right into embodied presence. I can still catch it, and I don't need to even think about it. So that moment, that embodiment is crucial. And you said also that as we become more and more digitized in our lives through the screens and devices, right? So students seem to be losing that embodied experiencing of their lives. So it's even more crucial that we keep remembering how to catch the ball. So my question, I guess, to you and others is it even possible at some point, like when I look at Generation Alpha and younger, right? So Generation Alpha being 10, 12-year-olds right now, born into the digital. They do not seem to know much about the physicality of the environment. They're very much in the screens, living most. So I wonder sometimes whether they're forgetting, whether they even know, how to play by the riverbank and catch a fish or play with sticks and stones and that kind of stuff. So I wonder, I guess my question is, might it be possible that younger generations are becoming atrophied physically? That might it be possible at some point when you throw the ball for them to catch, they might not know what to do?
Yeah, it's a really good question. They seem to be able to catch just as well now as they used to be able to catch 20 years ago. I made this thing out of stuff from a pound store. I didn't say it, but with a Slovenian artist called Alenka Perman, back in 2004. So this is 20 years old, been adapted a few times. And in that 20 years, students seem to be able to catch as well as they used to. So I think those bodily habits will probably still stay with us. I don't think we'll entirely atrophy or be so two-dimensionally screen orientated that we actually don't even live in depth. So I don't think we'd ever really go there, but other people may have other thoughts about that. But I do understand. And it's very much, I do think the structural bench, I'm saying it over and over again, but it's one of the only devices that I know that really can break open this thinking and break open the screen so that people can recognize that it's not that their bodies are part of their learning. And we need more devices like it that are physical devices that involve their bodies, that enable them to learn through making and manipulating abstract machines that are physical as well. And that's my.
Thank you. I realize we're out of time here on this session. I know in the last session, a couple people kind of stuck around and talked afterwards, so I suppose that could happen again. I believe we have about 15 minutes here. Is that right? Who has the program in front of you,
Yeah.
Lance?
Yeah, we start up on the hour.
Okay,
15
so
minutes.
thank you everyone, and thank you to our presenters, and see you all back in about 15 minutes.